And on my dad's shortwave radio, it's my new friend, Corey Mintz. How are you, Corey?
I'm doing terrific this morning. I'm working on my second cup of coffee.
That's good. Just getting ready for us. It's a 2 cup of coffee morning before stacking Benjamins, of course. Hey, you, by the way, also just had a birthday party for a 2-year-old in your family, making some cupcakes I saw online.
We did. It was a great success.
You know, you write about restaurants and about how the help is treated in restaurants. Was the help treated fairly when you were making your cupcakes?
Well, I was the help. Or let's say that my wife and I were, the owner and the chef, or the GM and the sous chef, whatever. We were absolutely equals. But no, she made the cupcakes, and she actually came downstairs with a cupcake with a very disappointed look on her face, and the icing sort of dripping around the side. And she said, "Just tell me what to do." And I said, "Yeah, I'll do it for you." And it turns out I learned how to pipe rosettes when I was in cooking school. I hadn't done it in 20 years, but when she saw my rosettes, which were absolutely mediocre, and if I was in a kitchen, somebody would say, "Hey, that's a great start. Now do 100 more before you do
Nice
one." But she was very impressed. She looked at me the way everybody looked at Don Draper when he fixed that sink that one time.
I think that's the awesome part of being dad, my friend. That is the awesome part. And she will learn soon, right? She will learn that the frosting dripping down the side is the best part. I mean, that's clearly the best part. You write early in your book, during the introduction of your book, that we think of restaurants as places to eat. I'm directly quoting you here. And they are in the same way that Tony Soprano would describe his operation as waste management. What does that mean?
Well, in my years as a cook, and then later when I became a restaurant critic and then a food columnist, and got to work as a reporter inside restaurants and spend some time kind of embedded there and see what goes on. It's a very outlaw mentality. There's certainly not all restaurants. And in the book, I try to separate them into different genres so you see how sort of different socioeconomic rules apply to different restaurants. But in general, the sort of hip, urban, chef-driven restaurants, there's a really prevailing attitude of us versus the world. We're outlaws. We're pirates. We're bikers. We're gangsters. The rules that surround and govern our workplace are not something that the square 9-to-5 world would even understand. It's something you hear echoed in what they call pimpology. Which is the purpose of which is to convince the people working under you that the rules that govern the legitimate world or workplaces don't apply to them, because they can't, because if they did, your employees would realize they're being taken advantage of, they're being treated terribly, they're being underpaid, they're being abused, all these things. So you cultivate this attitude of like, nah, this isn't a workplace. This is like our hideout where we do our secret thing that nobody else gets.
It's funny. People like Tony Bourdain, I feel like, almost romanticize that for the rest of us, Corey.
He did a great job of it. I mean, I felt that way when I was a cook. I liked the fact that I worked. I personally enjoyed the fact that I worked every Friday and Saturday night, because it meant I didn't have to make an excuse to go to see somebody's band that I didn't want to see anyways. The things that my friends were doing in their 20s that they'd invite you to. I don't want to do those things. And
sorry, man, I got to work.
I was work. And I loved having, Mondays off. I loved the idea, like, if I need a new light bulb for my refrigerator, I'm going to go to the hardware store on Monday. There's nobody there on Monday. I don't have to compete with other people. If I want to see a movie, I'm going to go see a movie on an afternoon in the middle of a weekday when I'm not surrounded by other people. But not everybody shares that feeling. And certainly Bourdain was successful. I mean, he was a terrific writer. Before he was a television celebrity, he was a terrific writer, and he was really evocative at communicating a lot of the feelings within the kitchen, not just from the cook or the chef, but kind of within that whole ecosystem. And I think one of the unintended consequences of his success at being the sort of de facto spokespeople for restaurants is that he helped promote that attitude, the sort of
Yeah.
pride and suffering that goes along with being an exploited worker, where you go, no, I'm not being exploited. I'm tough. Look how macho I am by enduring all of this and not complaining about how, tired or broke I am, as well as some of the, even though his book was a book about addiction and his recovery from addiction, somehow, much like Scarface, a lot of audience members walked away from that forgetting the end of the story,
Right.
forgetting the part about getting clean and recovery or Scarface dying. They just remember the part where like the protagonist was high and excessive and having a real good time.
We had a great guest on our show last year who saw Scarface when he was 14 years old, decided he wanted to be him, moved to Miami, of course, ended up in federal prison, right? And didn't get the lesson of the movie. I mean, you're right. There's so many unintended consequences. I want to get to you've got so many issues here. Dining in restaurants has become such a big part of our food budget, as it is romanticized, right? As I read Tony Bourdain, I went from not really caring about restaurants to wanting to eat in at least 1-star Michelin restaurant I could find. If I could find an upscale restaurant and enjoy that, if I can watch the Netflix series about the celebrity chef, I wanted to do it. But we talk in financial circles about cutting your 3 big costs, right? Cut your home cost, cut your auto cost, and cut your food cost. And in food, you write that restaurants are really taking over for our grocery bill. I mean, we're starting to see quarters now where the restaurant bill is bigger than our grocery budget.
Yeah, certainly the pandemic has sort of interrupted the timeline, but essentially, back in the post-war era of the booming North American economy, food away from home spending, which means restaurants and such, was about a quarter of our food budget. And it just kept inching up constantly over the decades. And somewhere around the 90s, early 2000s, it just about equalized. And they were the same, our food at home spending, which is groceries, and food away from home spending, which is restaurants. And then a few years ago, around 2008, food away from home actually started overtaking it. And it only lasted a few financial quarters, but you could see the trajectory that we were on, especially in the era of the third-party delivery, where there's so many more opportunities, so many more reasons for people to be constantly not cooking for themselves. And I think the expectation is that was only going to continue. And then obviously everything changed in March of 2020. Obviously, last calendar year, food away from home spending did not exceed our groceries, but most of us saw our grocery budgets double last year. And obviously over the next year or two, we're going to see a lot of changes. Nobody has a crystal ball, knows how that looks now, but you can at least look at past behavior, our increased expectation that no, somebody else is going to do the cooking. And you have to look at, so what are the unintended consequences of that?
You also say that number one, Corey, as you wrote, this disconnects us from our food because somebody just serves it to us on a plate. I got a piece of paper. I decide what I want. I'm disconnected. I have no idea what goes on behind the scenes of my food. You also say that this has been a very quick change just societally. What was your number? Like 41% of people in the 1950s, I think, were connected directly to agriculture. They had agricultural jobs, and the number now is significantly less.
It's a little older than that. It's at the turn of the 20th century. So
okay.
Back then, yeah, it was in the 40s. People had so many Americans were involved in food production and agriculture, and that dwindles down recently to about under 3%. So that's a huge. Obviously, we can see the causes of that over these successive generations. How many of us grew up on a farm or know people who grew up on a farm? When we do, it's like, oh wow, farm, what was that like? And the consolidation of the farm industry and the industrialization are all part of that. But one way or another, we've all gotten further and further away from having any relationship with how our food is produced.
You made me feel lucky for growing up in a farming family, because a lot of the stuff at the grocery store I've experienced. But you talk about the experience of walking through fields and finding out that broccoli, I think, going bad because of the fact that they didn't use pesticides to grow it organically, or different foods where one late frost, kills a whole farmer's production. Like those are big things to the average person that I think most of us don't have any connection to, even if we go to the farmer's market sometimes.
It's huge, the disconnect. What kind of farming did your family do?
It was a fruit farm. It was a 125-acre fruit farm, blueberries and apples, pears and strawberries and raspberries.
Wow, that's huge. And it was commercial, conventional growing? It
was commercial. Well, kind of. I mean, it was my grandpa's farm, but yes, he used pesticides and commercial stuff. And
seasonal laborers come in to.
Talk about farming conditions, Corey. He had 17 kids.
Wow. All with the same partner.
All with the same part. Big Catholic family. So wow. Yeah. Yeah, so he kept his labor costs low, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Okay. So wow, you had a lot of aunts and uncles growing up.
I certainly did, and I've got cousins all over the place. And when we would go, I was a track and cross country runner, and when they'd announce, my event, usually the mile, people would, after the race, say, "You're from the blueberry people." We were known as the blueberry people locally. So I'm Joe the blueberry people. But most people don't have, Corey, to the point. Most people don't have that type of connection, which means we don't know what questions to ask about our food. You, in fact, talk about your favorite Snickers bar and really horrifyingly the stuff that goes into the making of your favorite Snickers bar. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah. It's been, and now you're bringing back memories, because it's been a while since I've had a Snickers. And I remember when and you're speaking to me from Canada, where anytime you get variations on brand name candy bars, they're always, they either don't make it here or they come here like 6 months later. So for all I know, you're like, hazelnut Snickers. Yeah, we had that in 1992. I got one. I went to go see Lethal Weapon 3, and I got I remember like a year or two ago.
I don't think we've ever had hazelnut Snickers. I'd never heard of it, but it sounds delicious.
Yeah, they released like an almond and a hazelnut, and the hazelnut one was I had to tip my hat. It was a great candy bar and a genuine improvement on the original. But then it's rare that I eat candy bars now because I'm a middle-aged man, and you read the back of the wrapper and you go, what's in there? Or you read a news story and you find out where these companies source their products. And, most of the candies that we like, whether it's Nutella or Reese, they're usually getting palm oil, which helps give that creamy consistency to Nutella from Indonesia, which contributes to deforestation and ultimately will lead us to the extinction of orangutans. And the chocolate in so many of these companies is coming from the Ivory Coast. We're still in 2021. These global companies cannot guarantee that there's no child or forced labor in the production of chocolate. I mean, how much more time is needed for these companies to say, we're looking at our supply chains, we're trying to work with locals on the ground and change things. I mean, that's just the reality of buying commodity products like that. And there's organizations looking to change things on the ground floor, but that's the nature of buying commercial goods.
I remember reading, once again, Tony Bourdain talking about how I don't control your waistline. So I just use a lot of butter. I mean, my goal is a lot of butter. You talk about eating more in restaurants and you get fat. You don't know where your food comes from there. You talk about your Snickers bar. I didn't know any of that about a Snickers bar. So we don't know what questions to ask about our food. Let's go back to the help that you talked about to continue to build this argument before I ask you the inevitable question of what do we do about it? You talk about 3 practices in restaurants: wage theft, tip skimming, and abuse. And I'd love to take those individually about restaurants, because these were incredibly disturbing. Let's talk about wage theft first. What's going on there?
Well, wage theft has many faces, but in general, it's a catch-all term that means somehow workers are being cheated out of the money that they're owed, they're promised, or they're legally entitled to. And this takes many forms. The most common form in restaurants would be day wages. In some restaurants, cooks are paid hourly. In some restaurants, they're paid a day wage. This has largely been phased out over the last decade, but for a day wage, you'd get, a set rate for the day, regardless of how many hours you worked. But in a lot of the places that pay a day wage, you work 12 or 14-hour days. And, as was my experience as a cook, where I was on salary, but either way, same situation. When I finally did the math, and I divided, my 12-hour day by the amount I was being paid, and I went, wait, I'm making less than minimum wage? And this is a fancy restaurant. We charge $100 for dinner. So that's one common form of wage theft. Something I've seen in the last 5 years is, for example, in Ontario, about 3 or 4 years ago, the minimum wage went up. I knew some cooks who were working were making day rates. No, let me take this again. A common form of wage theft when you're making the hourly rate is, I talked to many cooks who they work for high-end restaurants where, yes, they're paid a good wage for the hour, but then they're given an amount of work that cannot be done in the number of hours that they're scheduled for. So not that they're ever told explicitly to do this, but everyone comes in 2 hours early every day. You add all that up.
Because if you don't, you're going to fail and you'll get fired.
Yeah, and that's a common managerial philosophy for a lot of chefs. Give a cook a longer prep list to do than they can accomplish in a day, and they will get faster. And it's true, they'll get faster. But until they do, they're being stolen from. They're not earning what they're supposed to be earning based on the hours they work. And when they do inevitably get faster, you'll just give them more work to do. Or you'll promote them to sous chef, put them on a salary, and then expect them to pull up the slack for the employees below them, and to in turn exploit those employees in the same way that they were worked over.
Sounds like a fantastic promotion. Fantastic in quotes. Tip skimming. I think I know from the name, Corey, what tip skimming is. But is this literally the ownership of the restaurant taking some of the tips and hiding them for themselves?
Yeah, it can be. I think in its most common and worst version, that's what it is. This is one of those things that changes from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But in a lot of places, certainly where I come from, it was eventually made illegal for owners to take a percentage of a tip, unless, and this is specific to Ontario, I think, unless those owners worked a shift, like in the case where, hey, I've got a restaurant, I got 10 employees, but I actually worked a shift as a host or as a bartender or as a server, in which case, sure, I'm sharing the tip with staff. But in most cases, it's illegal for owners or managers to take a percentage of a tip. And tip skimming is often either, you've got the owners finding some other way to skim the tips, either saying, oh, we're going to take 2% of gross tips for breakage or for, some employee fund that's really my money, or somehow re-diverting some percentage of tips to managers who shouldn't be getting a percentage, but should be getting a proper salary, or using that to bump up their pay because you're not paying them what they're worth either.
I get the feeling, by the way, that you don't seem to be a big fan of the whole tipping system at all anyway.
Yeah, I'm not agnostic about tipping. I'm pretty anti-tipping. I'm realistic that we're not currently about to revolutionize that model. It's not happening today, but I'm definitely firmly in the camp of abolishing tipping.
And abuse, you and I, before we hit record, we're talking about a celebrity chef from back maybe 20 years, Charlie Trotter in Chicago, and about how he was known for abusing the hell out of his staff. Grant Atchett talks about it publicly on his Netflix Chef's Table special. Other people have talked about how Charlie Trotter treated people. You talk about how abuse in the kitchen can be horrible.
Yeah, I was fortunate in my cooking career. I never worked for anyone who screamed at us. I mean, I had one boss who was, to me, a terrific boss, and he probably yelled at us maybe a couple times, like once a year. He'd kind of lose it. I think everybody loses it once a year. I think, my daughter's 2 years old, and so far I haven't lost it like that, but it's inevitable, right? Everyone's going to blow their fuse sometimes, but
I think doing that once, Corey, not to cut you off, but I think doing that once just shows that you're passionate. I mean, don't get me wrong, not with your 2-year-old, but I'm talking about if you own a restaurant and you're passionate and you really want to make sure the customer is served well, losing it once a year, to your point, I think is perfectly understandable. Losing it every day is a whole different thing.
Yeah, there's a difference between reaching a breaking point because, something went wrong at work, plus your car broke down, plus you're going through a hard divorce and you acted in a way that you regret. And then the next day you go and you apologize to people. There's a difference between that and ruling a workplace through fear. And I think we can all see the black and white difference through that. And certainly things are changing. I think it's probably a little fair to say we have a moment now with a great potential for change. And we have a moment now where restaurant workers, servers, and cooks, I think, are much more aware of their rights and are much more willing to advocate for change within their workplaces and within their industries. The attitude of the boss who's like, I'm brilliant. The people here are here because I'm brilliant. So I'm not going to second guess myself. And if anybody second guesses me and yell at them, and if they do anything less than the perfection that I imagine, I'm going to yell at them. I think that sort of person is becoming more and more marginalized. That behavior is becoming less and less acceptable because there's just a crop of 21-year-olds who are not going to put up with that shit. Yes, there's people who want to go learn at the feet of the master, but the world is too full of young people who have no patience for that old type of toxic chef mentality.
The next time we have you back, I want to dive more into that. But one thing I want to point out to everybody listening was Corey wrote this great section of the book about the problem with celebrity chefs and about how people whispered to you that these people are rock stars. And then you said, I never talked to Nikki Sixx from Motley Crue about how he manages people. And if you really
let's not throw Nikki Sixx or rock stars under the bus. I remember writing that, and I called my aunt because she was married to a musician who was in the band, Richard Manuel, and she ended up touring with Aerosmith and
wow,
Ringo Starr and a bunch of other musicians. And so I called her to ask her, I'm like, am I being unfair to rock stars? And she said, it's hit or miss. And she's like, look, I'm not gonna name any names in your book, but like, yeah, there are people that I work with who like absolutely are like making sure that everybody has dental coverage and is taken care of. And there are, famous musicians who were like, yeah, I'm going to get a seat on the airplane for my hat. But the people who work for me, like, they're garbage. Why would I care?
Yeah. If you ever want to, this is a whole tangent, read about Pete Townsend and what he did with the Who. Like just, I remember listening to Roger Daltrey talk to Howard Stern about how Pete Townsend, there were 3 different splits. There was the writing credit, then there was the band performing credit, and then there was the producing credit. So they'd split it into thirds, and Pete Townsend kept the whole third for producing it, the whole third for writing it, and then split it 3 ways. The last third 3 ways is my understanding, the way I remember Roger telling it to Howard. So he ended up getting all this money. And I remember Howard Stern saying to him, like, what do you do? And Roger Daltrey said, I had a choice. I could be in or not, right? I'm either a part of the Who or I'm not a part of the Who. We knew Pete was ripping us off. But what was my choice? But to get back to your point, I feel like when you're around a celebrity chef, that's the way a lot of these workers feel. I got this great opportunity to work with. He's dead, so let's talk about him, Charlie Trotter. I got this chance to work with Charlie Trotter. I'm going to just suck it up.
That's been the prevailing attitude for a long time. I think it's starting to change. It's hard to tell right now because we've been in this moment for the past 5 years where people have been, calling out famous people and lobbying accusations at them. And in most cases, I have no reason to doubt these accusations. But some of what we're seeing is these sort of very unspecific mea culpas from the name above the title chefs, where they'll write an essay. It gets published in some popular forum that basically says, I used to be an asshole in some very unspecified way that I'm not going to be legally culpable for because I'm not saying what I did. And I don't want to be that guy anymore. And I'm going to be different in some way that I'm also not going to be specific about, because then you could hold me to account for whether or not I've successfully changed. And, that person would then get the accolades of like, bravo, this is why they're an industry leader. I think we're also starting to call bullshit on that as well.
Yeah.
But that's been the attitude, I think, from a lot of sort of the older, established, successful people, but who are also canny enough to see the writing on the wall, and that the times are changing. They go, okay, so I have to signal that I'm changing with the times, but I can't make a confession because then I'm done.
Right.
And I can't make any too specific promises because then I actually have to hold myself to them. But there's certainly still, and there's always going to be a cult of personality around certain creative leaders in any industry, and I can't get into music or film or tech or finance or whatever the specific nature of cult of personality in those fields, because it's a similar thing, right? You want to work in a creative area, you go to work with the best people, and you do anything to work with them. Just looking at restaurants and chefs, one thing we can start to do is we can change the conversation. I can't tell young people, don't have this attitude, don't go and let yourself get exploited by these wizards. But, we can change the way we craft food media, the top 10 lists, the deification of chefs, the endless profiles. Once this person is a famous chef, we just write about anything they do. They're a celebrity now. And my basic my line in the sand came to a point where I said, like, I don't want to write and I don't want to read about any chef unless it's about like how they run their business. Like, if their food is really great, I'd love to eat it, but I'm not really interested in like the glorification of their creative process. What would be more fascinating to delve into and to share with people is like, oh, here's someone who has created a work environment that fosters people who can, go on to lead their own successful creative lives, or, start families or own homes. All the things that they're completely cut off for. Sorry, take that again. Mm-hmm. All the things that workers in these restaurants are completely cut off from by their subservience to the system.
We spoke to a gentleman named David Bodanis recently about the art of fairness, and about how his biggest takeaway, Corey, was it is possible to be a fair, good person, not a pushover, but a fair, good person and make it. It's very difficult. But I think that for a restaurant, especially, you should be able to feel that. I think that if everybody's working and pulling together, to use a rowing analogy, everybody's rowing the boat together, it makes the boat row much faster. All right. We built this argument of we don't know the questions to ask about our food. We're not sure where it comes from. We don't know which restaurants are paying people fairly. We're not sure what's in the food that we're eating at a restaurant. We're completely disconnected. I won't even get us started. I was all excited, but I'm looking at the time. I won't get us started on delivery apps, which you call a scam. And I generally am right there with you, brother. And Dr. Juliet Shore was there. And I know, and I get hate mail from our listeners who drive for Uber Eats and stuff every time. Listen, I'm not going to argue with you guys. I'm just going to say, if you read Corey's book, it's just more proof that yes, you can make money driving for Uber Eats. But Corey, do you remember the Hunger Games? May the odds be ever in your favor. Remember that? The odds are not in your favor.
I feel like you're suckering me into talking about something that you said we weren't going to talk about.
We can't go there.
I talk about the scam of third-party delivery companies, but you told me not to.
We have to save that for the next time you're here. This is turning into a 4-part Corey Mintz series, I think. I feel like. But to get into this, everybody's afraid to ask. We don't want to look stupid. We don't want to stick our foot in our mouth. And you reference a popular old show called Portlandia. Well, and let's listen to this. Our 2 main characters from Portlandia sitting down to order, and I'm wondering if this should be us.
Hello.
Hi, hello.
My name is Dana. I'll be taking care of you today. If you have any questions about the menu, please let me know.
I guess I do have a question about the chicken. If you could just tell us a little bit more about it.
The chicken is a heritage breed, woodland raised chicken that's been fed a diet of sheep's milk, soy, and hazelnuts.
Okay, this is local?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm going to ask you just one more time, and it's local.
It is.
Is that USDA organic or Oregon organic or Portland organic?
It's just all across the board, organic.
Hazelnuts, these are local?
How big is the area where the chickens are able to roam free?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I had exactly the same question.
4 acres. Give me just a second. I'll be right back, okay?
Okay.
4 acres. That's Fred Armisen and Carrie Brownstein in that now very famous scene that you reference in the book. We don't want to be that. But maybe people do want to be that person. I don't want to ask them where the chicken's raised. What questions should we be asking that we're not asking? And how do we begin making a change here, Corey, in how we get served at restaurants?
I think you nailed that question there. And I love that you set up that clip by calling it an old show, as if you were going to play a clip from the Andy Griffith show or something instead of something from, I don't know, 2011. It doesn't seem that long ago, but I take your point. That skit, which is great, and it's timeless. It had this unintended chilling effect because that show landed at this time early in the Great Recession, just shortly after that, with this sort of convergence of people being more aware and caring more about where food comes from, but also having money for the first time since the global economy had collapsed. And the impact of the virality of that sketch, which everyone kept referencing, was like nobody wanted to be that person because, they present that as this like incredibly obnoxious bourgeoisie performative concern, which is unfortunate because, all the questions they're asking, they're legitimate questions that, when I found a butcher that I really trusted, I was like, great. So your job as a butcher is you ask all these questions. And once I've gotten to know you, I just trust you. I don't have to come in and ask these questions. I go like, so you've done the research. Until I hear that you are a bad guy, then I'm just going to trust you to do this stuff. The huge problem once we start getting into caring about restaurant employees the way we learn to care about animals is that, one, there's that chilling effect of like, oh, we don't want to be embarrassed being that person. And two, the system is so opaque and not uniform. It's not like airlines or sports arenas where like there's huge employers and employment rules are so consistent across the field. Restaurants are so much more like fiefdoms, or gangs. But the solution has to be starting to let go of that self-consciousness that you're going to be obnoxious for caring, much less asking about those things. I think how you ask matters, and the answers you get don't have to be like you're not a detective. You're not a PhD student gathering information for their dissertation. Like you don't have to go in there with a notebook and, as Armisen, in the skit follows up, like, I'm going to ask you like a third time and it's local. I think the very act of asking questions, like, how are people here paid? So this is a tipping place. Like, how are tips shared? Do people, because there's a million different schemes for how tips are divided, whether it's like everybody gets a percentage, there's a tip pool, everybody has tips for their own station. But beginning to have those conversations, and always in a polite way, and always aware that the people you're talking to don't necessarily have all the freedom to be open and transparent in the workplace, or they don't have all the time, but sending the signal to restaurants that we want to be part of that conversation. We care about supporting workplaces that pay a livable or a fair wage. Once you start that conversation, that changes the dynamic. It stops being something that restaurants for the past 50 or 60 years says, this is the way we do business. It's illegal, it's inequitable, and it doesn't bear scrutiny to the light of day, but it is the way it is. And so long as nobody comes in and asks questions, we're going to keep doing it this way. I think things change when people come and start asking questions. So when you do have those conversations, I think people should remember, ask a couple of questions and let it lie. Don't keep your server at your table grilling them. That would become the Carrie Brownstein and Armisen characters, but say hey, what's this deal? You go into a place that you've been to 100 times, and now they have a tip prompt on the payment terminal, and you go, oh, there's a tip prompt. I've never seen that before. And there's nobody behind you in line. Ask them. So do employees get 100% of these tips? Does management get any? Just simple questions. I think open up the dialogue and make it less make it less palatable for those workplaces to by default screw over workers.
I love the emphasis on having a little velvet on your hammer. I think that is so important, how you ask the question. And I also love the idea of voting with your wallet, right? And one thing that you point out in the book that I'd really like to emphasize for people, that as I was researching for this discussion, Corey, you wrote that people like you have made these lists all over the place. There are people that are listing restaurants that you should be going to and voting with your dollars. It's just a matter of going online and doing a little research instead of hopping in your car and just going.
It takes less time to ask someone who knows where to eat than it does to sift through the questionable material you'll find online. I mean, if you feel comfortable saying where should I eat in my city or while I'm on a trip, then quick Google that city and you're going to get a dozen top 10 lists that all say the best restaurants in wherever it is. Who made those lists? What did they get paid? Did they actually eat in the restaurants? Are they their friends' restaurants? Did they go to the restaurant and have a bunch of free dinners paid for by a PR firm? You have no idea. And if you want to try to discern that, or if you want to go on Yelp and sort of try to figure out which reviews are real and which are fake, which are politically motivated, you can do that. Or it's pretty easy to find out who's a food writer in your town, who knows about this stuff and cares about it. Find their email and say, where should we go on our anniversary? Where should we go for my grandfather's birthday? They'll get back to you. They have lists upon lists, and they love shit. I love telling people where to eat. I love not telling people where to eat. I love helping people have a good dining experience, steering them towards something I think is going to be pleasurable. Everyone who cares about food loves that. So find those people and ask them.
I think that's fantastic. You also talk about how James Beard, the famous society, changing the way that they're doing ratings. They're including, my understanding is they're including now how restaurants treat their workers.
Yeah, they started this list. I think it's the Good Food one. I can't remember the name of the list, but either way, it began a few years ago when it was sort of a list of top restaurants that included their sourcing and sustainability practice in the ratings. And in the inaugural year, I believe, or maybe the second year, they began to incorporate treatment of workers into these ratings. And then the pandemic came along and obviously interfered with the ability to gather that type of thing, or the owners they were talking to, their ability or interest or capacity even to be able to audit themselves in order to contribute to this thing. But at the very least, it speaks to a shifting tone in the conversation amongst gatekeepers, realizing, oh, I think the public cares about these things. We care about these things, and maybe there's more of an audience for people who want to go out, whether we want a less expensive meal or a super luxurious, anniversary meal, we want to go and feel good about the money we're spending, that it went to someone who wasn't treating their employees like crap.
The book is The Next Supper, The End of Restaurants as We Knew Them. Not only all this, but you talk about the innovation, the change, and some disturbing trends from COVID. Man, just tons of storylines here that I think we just touched the surface. Corey, the book of
this conversation another time.
Absolutely, man. I want to talk more about cupcakes. That's what I want to talk about. But available everywhere.
Everywhere you buy books, you'll find The Next Supper, The End of Restaurants, and What Comes After.
And What Comes After. I didn't get that part. Of course, I didn't.
That's the positive.
Isn't that wild that I didn't get What Comes After at the end of What Comes After? Anyway, Corey, thanks for hanging out with us and talking about, creating a better food experience for all of us. I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.